things. I do want to apologize for any wind. I can't really fix that, of course. And I did want to explain this one's brace, and in that testing video I did say it came off, and the only reason I usually keep the brace off this one, and the reason why it doesn't like to keep a brace on it, is that this fit between this part right here, the strap, this leather strap is so tight fit to the axe head that the brace interferes with that and causes it to be loosened. So in case, for most of these videos, you're probably going to notice that this one will not be wearing a brace, whereas this one has a very loose strap without the brace, and so it works really well. Without further ado, this is going to be what a bushcrafting axe looks like. And I have a couple examples now that I can show, and surely there are more. As I've mentioned, Council Tool Velvet Cuts are very good bushcrafting axes, and Condor makes some good ones as well. Personally, I think Wetterling's GBA and Council Tools are the best, or Council Tool Velvet Cut especially, are the best for bushcrafting. Vintage axes are also a great way to go. But I don't have any vintage axes out here. I do have some vintage axes, right now. None of them are actually hung right now, they're just heads. And I don't tend to use vintage axes as much, but they are very nice. Here are the Wetterling Swedish Forest Axe and the GBA Scandi Forest Axe. I'm sure if you guys have been around my channel for any time, you guys are very familiar with the Wetterlings. I've had it for like 2.5 years. I've had it for a really long time. I love the axe. It's superb. It's worked for me and everything I've needed. And I just recently got the GBA, and I've really always wanted the GBA. Not to say that it's better. I actually still do, for most of my work, prefer the Wetterlings as far as its ability to cut deep into wood. But I do love the weight of this axe. Anyways, guys, this is going to be a comparison between these two axes. I'm sorry I'm ranting. But anyways, this guys, is probably not going to be quite as long for what a bushcrafting axe looks like per se, because admittedly there's not as much controversy, or it's generally a rule that Wetterling's GBA Council Tool are the great axe makers, unlike knives where there's so many different companies doing so many different things, and it's really hard to kind of decipher what's good. Even my video that I made back then, or about bushcrafting, even that could be open to interpretation, because I showed a Heli Egan and a Bark River Knives Bushcrafter, and those two are really kind of proper looking bushcrafting knives. But things like the Pull Force November 1 is also a really good bushcrafting knife. So knives, they're really hard to define what a good bushcrafting knife is, but I kind of tried there in that video. Still might be some confusion, and I think the biggest confusion when it comes to bushcrafting axes is what you're going to be doing with the axe, and that will really dictate the size, the weight, the overall capability of the axe. If you like to build with your axes, then you kind of need these sized axes. Now both of these are around 26 inches, and I would recommend, if you are going to build things, a handle length of around 26 inches is a great length. It's overall, just in my opinion, the best length for axes, because you can still do a lot, and you have a lot of leverage to chop down or fell larger trees, as well as it's not so large or cumbersome that you can still choke up within reason and use it for a little bit fine, such as feathering wood or those kinds of semi-fine tasks. I mean, these certainly aren't craft axes. You're not going to be able to build bowls with them or any kind of thing like that, but still, overall, 26 inches is a really great compromise, or really anywhere from 28 to 24 inches is a really great compromise range where you're not giving up too much of the leverage. You still have a good amount of fine detail work or capability to do that without getting fatigued. I recommend a handle length. Now on to axe head weight. Generally, this axe handle length is around 2 pound axe heads, and this one's, I think, around 2.5. This one's around 2. This one's definitely heavier. You can really feel it, and if you ever hold the axes side by side, this one's definitely a heavier head. but around 2.5 pounds is, or 2 to 2.5 pounds is really optimal for fatigue your hand if you ever have to do any close-up, choked up on the handle work with it. But it is when you go back to the 26 inches and you start to use it, the weight is really good at sinking in pretty deep into the wood. This one doesn't do quite as well, and that's because I think it's just the little bit lighter weight really does not help it. But either way, I mean, they both bite really deep into wood, and you don't have to put too much force behind it. And that's kind of the problem with smaller handle lengths, is you begin to have to put more of your own physical muscle behind the swing, and that can tire you out faster. It can lead to fatigue earlier. Anyways, 2 pounds to 2.5 pounds is really optimal, and the reason why I'm saying this, the head length specifically, is for a lot of people who are building, especially off vintage axes that don't come with any handles. Of course, these axes come pretty squared away, but if you're building an axe, what I would recommend, or if you have an axe head and you want to put a handle on it for bushcrafting, if you're looking for a head, around 2 to 2.5 pounds is really optimal. It'll allow you, like I said, a great deal of performance, as well as when you want to choke up and do finer tasks, a little bit finer tasks, you won't fatigue your hands as easily. Just additional things for bushcrafting axes, something I would recommend, and this kind of goes back to my gear modding video, but what I would recommend is not always a brace. They are nice, especially if you are bushcrafting. One of the reasons why I like it is it helps protect the handle, and that's so that if you do accidentally overstrike, you don't ruin your handle and consequently have to build another one. And while you can pretty easily out in the woods build handles for these axes, if you can just avoid it completely by just using a little bit of leather to protect it, that's all the better. But another thing I would recommend is just retrieval lanyards, especially if you're going to be out in the woods. Another thing I would recommend is retrieval lanyards, and they're really good, especially if you're going to be bushcrafting, because if you're out there in the woods by yourself and you only have a few tools, if you do end up losing your axe, that is something that's very, very bad. Especially if you aren't actually getting back out there, or you can't just go back to a house or building or something and get another one easily. Losing your axe can be an extreme disadvantage. So having a retrieval lanyard, of course both these axes have retrieval lanyards. It's a very important thing, I think, or that's one of the most important things that, like I said, I do put on all of my axes and highly recommend. Those are kind of the things that make up a bushcrafting axe, and like I said, it's a little bit more known as a rule. These kinds of axes are what bushcrafters use. Some people like smaller ones, and once again, it does go back to what you need out of an axe. If you aren't really building anything, or if you're bringing in your own shelter, it might not be as vital to have larger axes like these. But that I would recommend probably like a 20-inch axe. They're still big. They're not going to be able to cut through like the 8 to 7.5-inch diameter wood like these will, but they do pretty well through 6-inch and of course 4-inch diameter wood. And that's what a bushcrafting axe looks like, and I'm out.